What is your earliest memory of technology?
From a young age, I was obsessed with robots. When I was a kid, my parents got me this book called The Way Things Work. I would just get like some tape and tinfoil and make robots in my garage. My first internet experience was probably around 1990. In high school, I got known as like the hacker, king of the computer lab. I didn't do anything illegal or anything, but I was mischievous, right, as a kid, and I wanted to break things, or I locked down one of the school computers so only I could access it. Got detention, and the head of the computer lab brought me in and said, "Why don't we give you a test?" I went to study political science, which was a strange choice, but
Yeah.
and then bounced around all in the liberal arts category until I dropped out, like all good entrepreneurs. When I went to school, file sharing, Napster, everybody's hitting one server and they're all downloading Blink182.mp3. That was like the early days of that, so I thought that was really cool. I got deep into the eventually BitTorrent community, which led me into cryptocurrency ultimately.
How difficult was it to leave other teams that are doing passion projects and to kind of just go start your own?
It was like an arrow to my heart. I don't want to leave this team, but I have to do this. I have to go build this thing. Every major company will have its own blockchain. Bitcoin is the US dollar of the internet. We're gonna build it. That's when the mentality starts to shift. There's going to be a renaissance in banking. Metallicus is better built for banking.
So Marshall, welcome to the Marshall Show.
Thank you. It's good to be on my own show.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking the time to sit down with me today. I was wondering if we could take a little trip down memory lane and talk a little bit about Mini Marshall. My first question for you would be like, what is your earliest memory of technology?
Yeah, my earliest memory of technology is probably, as a kid, maybe being like 4 or 5 years old, watching cartoons, seeing Transformers. Now it's kind of like a new saga with the Transformers movie. But when it was a cartoon back in the day, I loved seeing the robots, the idea that these robots were AI or something. And then when I was a kid, my parents got me this book called The Way Things Work. And it was just a diagram of all the, inventions over the past, couple 500 years or whatever, all the way up to like a CD player, like a tape cassette or something like that. That was futuristic in the 80s, right? And I think maybe really beyond that, my first exposure to like computers was, I think I was probably like 6 years old or 7 years old. So this was getting into the early 90s. And I got my first computer, which was it was like a 286, ran MS-DOS. This is pre-Windows. So when you boot up the computer, it had floppy drives, and everything was command prompt. And then, so you type something in and it would boot up a game. Some of the early games I played were like, the educational games for kids, like Number Munchers. Some people remember Oregon Trail, stuff like that.
Yeah. Classic.
All the good stuff.
Yep.
But yeah, my first internet experience was probably around 1990. And I got onto, I think it was MSN or Prodigy through dial-up with MS-DOS. And it was an experience. You type in like, prodigy.exe and this thing would boot up and it was all VGA colors and dial up to the internet. And that was kind of my first exposure. And then back into the 90s, that was kind of the rise of AOL when I was, a teenager and stuff like that. That was kind of like interesting to me, where people start to get on through AOL. I was already at that point graduated to the greater internet, but hung around to AOL because there were the chat rooms and stuff like that. And
Absolutely.
That's where the early teenage script kiddie hacker people were, and made a lot of friends. And
what was your first screen name?
Oh, my first screen name, I'll never tell.
Okay. I understand. Wait, but a little bit before that, again, like, if I were to interview your parents, like, would they say you were like one of those classic kids who was always like tinkering with toys, like breaking them and like building them up? Or like, did you ever like create and build stuff as a kid?
Yeah, I was, from a young age, I was obsessed with robots and technology. So, when I was really young, I would just get like some tape and tinfoil and make robots in my garage. Obviously they're just little kids' dreams. But then as I got older, I got into software. I didn't really go the engineering path where I actually made working robotics, although I played very early on. I found a love in the web and software. And that's where kind of like my early teen years, I just was on the computer all the time. In high school, early days of high school, just high school, I got known as like the hacker because I was, king of the computer lab, and anyone had some sort of problem, I could fix it, but I could also create it. So, like any young kid up to mischief, I was subscribed to like hacker zines and news groups. So 2600, I actually used to buy the physical print version sometimes at Barnes and Noble.
Yep.
Back when we had bookstores, and was a big fan of that. And as a kid, getting into mischief, played with the early remote access tools like Cult of the Dead Cow, Back Orifice, and stuff like that. And these things were interesting to me because it was fun to play, to break things, right? And of course, I didn't do anything illegal or anything, but I was mischievous, right, as a kid, and I wanted to break things, and I researched all these things, and that's how I got into coding. Was I wanted to start to build my own applications, and that was the beginning of kind of like exploration. Started with Visual Basic, and then graduated to C++. And then, when I was in high school, I think I hacked like one of the school or I locked down one of the school computers so only I could access it. And got detention, and the head of the computer lab brought me in and said, "Why don't we give you a test and see if you want to take the advanced placement for the college classes in high school." So I did those, and did really well on those very early on as a young kid. Before senior of high school, had completed all of those and done really well. And computer science was always, it had become like a hobby for me. So I would spend so much time on the computer. As I got older, you get your driver's license and girls and your car, and you start to think as an older teenager, you maybe are less interested in the computer. But I actually got more interested anytime I wasn't out. When I was at home, I was on the computer. And so when I went off to college, I didn't study computer science, although I did apply for that, and I got a scholarship at a couple of places, but I didn't go for that. I went to study political science, which was a strange choice.
Interesting.
But yeah, and then bounced around all in the liberal arts category until I dropped out, like all good entrepreneurs. But the whole time just playing with computers, and my whole life, I always thought that if I pursue a career in IT or technology, that I would hate it, because they would become everything that I do for my passion, but also for my job, and it would just ruin it for me. But it just ended up happening anyways. So
you had mentioned that teacher. I was wondering if there were other like mentors or role models that inspired you, like getting into tech. Like, would you say he was an inspiration, or he kind of just was like, maybe you should take some tests, or were there any other like role models that you had?
Oh yeah, no, he was great. He was the head of the computer science department, and his wife was one of the English teachers at the school. And so they both saw me as like a student who I think maybe got into trouble or whatever, but hey, this kid really wants to learn, right? And so and I like to write too, and that was something that I found a passion in. And so, they both kind of were like, "Hey, let's get this kid, growing his passions, and computer science is one of them." And so, that was a big inspiration. And then after that, some of your first jobs, one of my first jobs was an internship at a early.com in the 90s called Mindshark. And one of the graduates from our high school came in, back to high school, and said, myself and some other graduates from the high school started this tech company, and we build websites, and we do IT and build simple apps and things like that. It's like an early IT development firm. And so I applied to be an intern, I think when I was like 13 or something like that, like freshman year. This is right after, the head of the comp sci brings me in, and I'm like, oh, maybe I'll try this. Maybe this could be really fun. And the CEO of that company, his name is Mac Cummings, he kind of pulled me under his wing, in the CTO. And that was my first tech job. It was really great. I actually reconnected with him about a year ago, and I thanked him for, if it weren't for that, maybe I wouldn't be doing the things that I'm doing now. But yeah, it really got me very excited. And I saw those guys, I think some of them went to school, some of them dropped out like myself. And, they were very successful. That company's still around today. They rebrand as, I think they're called Terrakeet now.
Wow.
But yeah, there are a lot of early mentors like this. And I remember being in college and sending screenshots to the then CTO of that company and saying, hey, look, I got Linux running on my Mac computer. I've got Linux and Mac dual booting here. And I'm writing some little apps and shell scripts and things. And he's like, oh, that's pretty cool. And these are like my hobbies. I did it for fun. I didn't think that it would turn into my career. When I went to school, file sharing, Napster, that was like the early days of that. So I thought that was really cool, and got deep into the eventually BitTorrent community, which led me into cryptocurrency ultimately.
That was a good transition. Of course, like I was going to ask, like when you did first stumble into that, like was it automatically like, wow, this could change the world? Or like, did you pursue it more out of like just simply curiosity? Like, oh, like tinkering around, like, what is this?
Yeah, I with BitTorrent, with both of these technologies, I thought, wow, it could really change the world, right? It's it's essentially new technology that makes things faster, more decentralized, more efficient. In the case of BitTorrent, this was interesting because it was the decentralization of data. Previously, everything kind of ran in like an A to B model, where you connect to a server, you go to whatever website, and I guess Napster is a good example of some of the reasons that ended. It had this, you'd hit Napster to connect to this database where you find other people sharing files. And that was an evolution from the original model where you just download the file from the website. So everybody's hitting one server and they're all downloading Blink 182.mp3. And and as more people download it, the speed gets slower and slower and slower. So the early internet was like that, right? You go, oh man, maybe I'll find a different server to link me this file because this is slow. And that was the beginning of cable internet, kind of beyond dial-up. And so then, Napster was interesting because you're sharing with all these people over the web. So it was easier to find, a file that you're looking for. To me, it wasn't so much about like, I'm going to get this CD for free or something like that. I always saw it as, in the future, everybody will be sharing data. We'll have this huge web of data. And, essentially what was the original Library of Alexandria, where, thousands of years ago, we had a lexicon of all different cultures' information in Egypt, in this port where all the ships were sailing through. Eventually that got burned down. Mm-hmm. But maybe in the future that it could never be burnt down because it's decentralized. There is no one library that could burn down, and we can all share all this information. As a child of the internet, what interests me about the web is that I can access anything, right? So when I was a kid, I would go to the library. I loved the library. But when the web came about, it was like, oh, you just search that, right? I'll just find that on the web. And as time has gone on, it's gotten even crazier. Now you could just ask your watch, and so like that's how crazy it's gotten. But to me, what I thought was so interesting was the fact that everybody could share all this music and movies and art. And, maybe in the future, there would be some sort of future licensing regime or some sort of way that the entertainment industry could profit off this while enabling this decentralized web. And that did happen. What that became was streaming, right? It was just a little bit different than how we maybe thought about it 20 years ago, but streaming became the future. And now everything is Netflix and Spotify and Google, YouTube, Hulu, you name it, right? Everyone in the United States and probably globally consumes some form of streaming probably almost every day, right? And so that's where the technology went. And in the beginning, it was hard to see because in the beginning, it was Real Player and things like that were, streaming was this mystical thing that's like, oh, you want to try streaming? It's all burping and chirping and this will never take off.
Yeah.
To the vision of BitTorrent And ultimately, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and blockchain is this as well. But it's the decentralization of money. It's the decentralization of attestation of information. And so BitTorrent to me was really cool because you have people from all over the world coming together to share this data. And yeah, there's the tertiary layer, which is like people saw, Pirate Bay or something like that, right? And I'm going to download. But there was a layer underneath that where people are spending thousands of dollars a month. They're spending way more than they would have ever spent with movies and music just to complete the library. And that was a very different mentality that I became part of. And through that, a discussion in a forum that I was moderating came up about an artist releasing his music through BitTorrent being his own label. But how does he get paid when people listen to it? Is it only tips, or is there some sort of technology that could blend in with BitTorrent that could enable that financial mechanism? But that wouldn't really work in 20 years ago because we didn't have blockchain. We had payment networks like Visa and MasterCard, which we still have today. And that's not really going to work in that decentralized system. It's not that the centralized and decentralized mechanisms don't really blend there until maybe you have the technologies to bridge that, and then also the businesses that have built around that. And now, flash forward in 2023, we have that. But it's just the very, very beginning of the decentralization of web and data and money and identity. Everything over time will become more and more decentralized and federated. So it's faster, it's more accessible, it's more transparent. And when you think about like streaming, think about what crypto looks like today in 2040. That's what streaming looked like 20 years ago for data. It was burpy and chirpy. So today, you may pay $5 to send an ETH transaction. You may pay $1 to $10 or whatever to send a BTC transaction. There are some new technologies like Proton, Metal blockchain, where you could make a transaction for free and there's identity, but it's still very early. We have only scratched the surface. You can't really see where all this stuff's going to go until you're actually living it. So I think 20 years from now, I like to use this streaming data analogy for crypto.
Because there was also that time in the middle where there was iTunes, but you still had to buy the song. Like every song was like 99 cents or like $1.29 and stuff. So, and that didn't last very long because it kind of it went from that into flat fee a month, and you get access to all the songs relatively quickly.
Right. And because I think that also, that was a model when people would go to the record store, right? So when people would go to the record store, they would buy, originally vinyl records and then tape cassettes and then CDs. And then that was the end of it, right? When the record store had the MP3 players in like 2002, 2005, 2000, that range, that was the beginning of the end, right? Those devices signaled the end of the record store, because now when you have this device, you buy this device, you take it home and you download the music. Why would you need to go to the record store anymore? And so when the iPod emerged, and I had I had the V1 iPod that I think actually came out in 98. It was funny when I brought it into the Apple store, they were like, where did you get this? I saw it in a museum recently, which was a real trip. And the sad thing,
I think it had like 100 song limit.
Well, it was actually pretty good because like the original MP3 player was actually this thing called like the Rio, and I think it came with a 16 megabyte card, which was basically enough for 3 or 4 songs or something like that. It wasn't even like a CD player. And then they came out with I think like a 64 and 128 megabit one, and the SD card started to get a little bit bigger. And then the first big innovation was the CD player that played MP3s. So we were, back in the day when people used to burn recordable CDs, people would download the MP3s, burn them to a CD as MP3 format. And it's like, oh, now I have 680 megabytes, which is the size of a CD. And then I think they came out with a DVD version so it could read like DVD-Rs, which had, I forgot, like over a gig or however much a DVD could hold several gigs. And that was kind of like, oh my God, I can fit gigs on a CD player. And then the iPod came out. It was just a hard drive, right? And I think that was over a gig hard drive. And that was the game changer, because a gig, you got multiple albums. And the 99 cent model was not bad, because people, it's so clean. You'd log in. Yeah, it's a little more expensive than, people. There were streaming options at the time, when the Apple iTunes store arrived. So there were some stuff that had, things that had popped up, but pretty quickly that died, because that streaming model exploded, right? And that was, I would say, around when the iPhone was launched, maybe 2007, something like 2006, 2007. So it took a few years, and then streaming really took off. And when the iPhone arrived, everybody was streaming on their iPhone. Within a year, everybody was streaming. And that was the end of the 99 cent app store. It's funny because iTunes is still around, but it's such a vestigial app for Apple. Like, does anyone even use that app anymore?
I do. I'll say I do. Yeah.
Yeah. It's cool because you can, it's the MP3 player, and it's the MP3 player in 2023. And now, you can put lossless audio into that. And there's definitely, as an audiophile myself, there's definitely a loss of appreciation for lossless audio, like FLAC formats, and Apple has their own lossless format that's pretty good. People don't really think. I figured that's probably what you're talking about, and I do too. But I'll tell you, I've definitely become a user of convenience, where it's like, I'll definitely listen to streaming over, booting up lossless audio. Lossless audio is like maybe once a month. I'll be like, open up iTunes, put on an album in lossless audio that I really like over some speakers. Yep. But yeah, those days are gone. The technology's changed so much. I think flash forward, 20 years with blockchain, the wallets will be gone, the cards will be gone. We're already down to this, right? Which is like a magnet that sticks on the back of your phone. It holds like 3 or 4 cards, something like that. And I mean, what else would you really need? You don't need cash anymore. I recently went to Japan and realized there are countries that are still doing like a lot of stuff in cash. I flew all the way out there with 0 paper dollars. Yeah. That was okay. I just eventually I got some, but it was like, wow, people are still using cash. When I went to Europe, it was crazy, because I would hand like a waiter my card, or I'd go somewhere and try to pay with a physical card, and they'd be like, what is that? So everything's tap to pay. So 2020 and COVID really changed all of that. And I think when you think about what crypto can do, it's been abused in many ways, where it's gotten a bad name in some ways in the early days, because you have the wild, wild west of money. So if you think back to 1800s and the origins of Wells Fargo as a bank originally, was a stagecoach that would go east to west, and it would, they would get robbed. Robbers would come up and try to rob the stagecoach. And
that's interesting.
And yeah. And so if you think about the wild, wild west of the early days of Manifest Destiny in the United States, and the early banks like Wells Fargo with their armored stagecoach.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense that was kind of the origins of crypto too, that you had a lot of explosions, and you get to a point where things start to evolve to a more advanced state. And also not only from an understanding of people understand it more, but there start to emerge regulations, there start to emerge a bigger industry and more standards. Think about the banks of 1800 in the United States versus the banks of 2023. Totally different. And that's what's happening with cryptocurrency. And we just saw one of the first stablecoin bills pass in Congress recently, which I think is huge. It's going to essentially enforce KYC on stablecoins. And so that's and also it's going to push stablecoins to work and partner with banks. So that really, in my mind, is the beginning of a complete landscape change for crypto. No more wildcat stablecoin. And this existed in the 1800s. You'd have banks that would issue dollars this is pre-Federal Reserve, pre-central bank. That was, Bank of Louisiana. And maybe you're in New York and there are no banks that accept Bank of Louisiana dollars, but someone will buy it for 80 cents on the dollar. So flash forward into the future, stable coins can become part of the banking system. We will have our own United States issued central bank digital currency. And these technologies, in my mind, what's really going to happen is going to allow for business to move at 1,000 times the speed than it ever could have before. Because really, some of the biggest things that hold up business are the speed at which payments can happen, the speed at which contracts can be signed, the communications aspect, which I think has been solved, which not that it's only solved, but it's really evolved in the past 3 years. You think about how we used to all go to the office, and now I don't go into the office anymore. And certainly there are companies that do have offices, but we're all telecommunicating using Slack, using everything we don't wait to physically meet in the office to set up a meeting. We're in the car, Google FaceTiming on Slack, Google, whatever it might be. So crypto, same thing. The speed at which contracts can get signed, the speed at which markets can emerge, and these tech payments can be made. It's huge. And yeah, you can say, well, the traditional system's pretty good. I could send a wire to you right now in the US and it will arrive in a few hours. Well, could it arrive in under a second? Right. And what's the ratio of a few hours to a second, and the probability of not knowing, like maybe it won't arrive today? That's cannot be underestimated. And I've gotten a lot of flack for saying this, but it won't be Bitcoin. It won't be some commodity-based currency, because we don't necessarily make payments to each other in gold or things like that. That may be payments between machines or payments within a DAO or things like that. But stable coins will dominate the future of blockchain payments. And so what this looks like in 20 years from now is going to be that, like the evolution of Real Player to Spotify and YouTube Music. It's going to be just a completely different animal. That's there are no fees. It's 10,000 times faster. Remember when we used to pay for text messages? It's like,
yeah.
It's like 10 cents. Oh, I'm out of my text message time zone between 7 p.m. and midnight, or 6 a.m. I get free text messages.
Yeah.
Right.
And limited characters. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. Long distance telephone calls, paying 99 cents per song. Paying 99 cents per song reminds me kind of like paying 99 cents to send crypto, Yeah. Same thing.
I did want to really quickly, went a little bit ahead. I wanted to go back to that point where you had worked on other blockchain projects before starting your own company, right? And I was wondering if you could walk me through your decision to leave those teams. Was it an urge that you just wanted to try your own things, or like how difficult was it to leave other teams that are doing passion projects and to kind of just go start your own?
It's difficult, but I would say that it was like sometimes something in life, you go through cycles and different phases of your life where you're, when you're young, you're in school. When you're older, you get a job, and then you have kids, and and so everybody goes through kind of like these phases. And my phases in cryptocurrency was the first few years was just me playing. So before I worked with any company or anything like that, I just wanted to be involved. And I wanted to prove that I could send you Bitcoin from the West Coast to the East Coast, or from, United States to Europe, and you could actually turn that into money, and vice versa. Right. So I was there, P2P trading and hanging out in internet relay chat, the early days of Bitcoin. This is pre altcoins. The first altcoins emerging around like 2011. There were some other, maybe late 2010. I can't remember, around that time. Barbecue coin, Lucky coin, Litecoin, Pure coin, Prime coin, some of the first
which you
ones.
could only get with BTC.
Yes. Yeah. So this is pre-stable coins. In the beginning, everything was paired to Bitcoin. So that's one of the things that really helped grow the Bitcoin liquidity over the years was, back in the day, when you get listed, it's a BTC to, the asset that's being listed. So if you're building a project, that would be your counterpart. Now, I don't think anybody gets a BTC listings. Everything is stable coin pretty much. There are altcoin pair listings, they tend to be low liquidity and low volume, right? Um, but yeah, that, my interest started with QuickCoin. That was my first crypto startup. Conceived that idea in 2012. Met my co-founder, found a co-founder in 2013, and started building. Launched that by 2014. And QuickCoin was a simple app to use Bitcoin. So my first few years of using crypto, I was experimenting with it, trying to prove that it was real money, that we could use it and, play with it. And then I realized one of the biggest problems was there's just no good software. All of the software is just, I don't want to say trash, but it was kind of trash compared to what you see in the App Store, because the App Store had launched a few years earlier, and, Steve Jobs and, Apple had really evolved, apps at that point. And so when the idea came around that I'm going to use this thing that is desktop only, that doesn't make sense. So that was the first thing. And then there aren't really many good web apps. Blockchain.info, which is now blockchain.com, was one of the very first Bitcoin web wallets that was pretty popular and pretty good. But even that got hacked and had early issues. I can remember the Joho hack, for those that were around. The random number generator wasn't strong enough. There were, lots of crazy early hacks with wallets, and there weren't any good mobile app wallets. And so I just wanted to make Bitcoin easy to use in a way that anyone could just create a Bitcoin wallet and send it. And so I came up with this idea to make a simple, easy to use wallet we called QuickCoin. So get your coin quick, send it quick. And this is back in the day when everything had the word coin or bit in the name if you were a company. So Coinbase, BitPay, QuickCoin. This is, the early days of crypto. And so, yeah, we came up with this idea to connect it to Facebook and generate a hierarchical deterministic wallet, an HD wallet, but using the Facebook social graph. So one of the keys was basically based around your Facebook login, and it wasn't perfect, but the idea was that it was like a petty cash wallet. So like what you keep in your back pocket. So maybe you keep 20 or $100 and you don't keep your life savings in this wallet, but also the concept was tipping and payments between friends. So one morning I logged into Facebook and QuickCoin had really taken off. My whole Facebook feed was people quick coining each other. So as I'm scrolling through my Facebook feed, I'm seeing, my mom, my grandmother, and, my family. And I'm like, oh, if they're doing this, then that's a really good sign, because
like Venmo today, almost.
Exactly. Like Venmo today. And Facebook shut it down pretty quickly. But they couldn't, for whatever reason, due to their policy, the API keys that were created at that time were grandfathered in for some period of time. So Facebook changed their the social graph, so you could no longer wall post between each other with the app, and I caused that to happen. The other thing, because they loved it when it was Candy Crush doing it, and they make all this percentage, but they hate it when Bitcoin was doing it because they're not making any money off it. And I kind of had accidentally front run their plan for payments with Facebook Messenger. So Facebook Messenger had just started to demo payments for some users in 2013 or 2014. And so then they shut that down. And, like most startups, I had kind of the early co-founder dispute, didn't agree with that founder who I had brought in. I ended up leaving QuickCoin, and that's where I got really interested in Dogecoin, and I ended up joining Stellar. And the interest in Dogecoin was really kind of my frustration with crypto becoming so commoditized and commercialized, where we used to be a bunch of nerds kind of talking about building things. The Bitcoin meetups and crypto meetups had become overrun with price speculators and people that just wanted to show up to be like, where do you think this coin is going? And can you sell me at a discount or whatever? And it had just become less developer-y. There were less devs, and there was also a feeling of hopelessness because Bitcoin had risen around this time in 2014, had risen all the way up to about $1,400, $1,300, $1,400. and then all the way back down to 165.
Hmm.
So that 90% drawdown was just excruciating for people because they really thought this was the time. This is the moment that it was taking off. And it was certainly in a big way. But because things were so focused on price and the morale was kind of low, I just wanted to be a part of something where people didn't talk about price. And Dogecoin emerged, where people first started asking me, should I buy Doge? Should I buy the doggy coin? And this is December of 2013 when it launched. And I was like, what is that? And then when I found it, and I found Billy and Jackson, Christine, and the community behind Dogecoin, I instantly loved it, because the people would joke, what is the cost of one Doge? Well, one Doge equals one Doge. That was kind of one of the early famous sayings of 2014, the first year of Dogecoin. And I loved that because it brought in young people. We stopped talking about price, started focusing on building and community. And that's where I met Glenn Marion, our CTO. And through Jackson, through the founder of Dogecoin, he connected me with Jed McCaleb and Joyce Kim, who had started a company called, a foundation called Stellar Development Foundation, which was the fork of Ripple. Jed had created Ripple, and he also had a disagreement with the founders and left to create Stellar. And so when we connected, we instantly hit it off because I had a similar experience, and Jed shared his story with me, and my story was very similar, and said, how would you like to come work with me and change the world? We'll pick up where you left off with Quitcoin, and we'll rebuild it, and we'll redo it, and we'll do it with Stellar instead of Bitcoin, XLM, STR at the time. And I was like, yeah, this is great. So I went there. Was only there for like 3 or 4 months before I left. The reason why I ended up leaving and how I left was really just I wanted to build that. That was my baby. That idea was like, it was bigger than just an idea. It was a thing that had to come alive through some way or another. And so when I was at Stellar, we started to build it out, but I didn't really own the product. My role was community, but technically I was like support, product development, marketing, social media management. I was doing all these things. And, at one point, there was a mention of, so we launched the Stellar wallet, which was kind of very similar to Quitcoin. It used your Facebook, it was identical, but we took it further and we gamified it. So you did these little tasks and you earned more Stellar. And it had several million users on it. It was really kind of growing. And then the team within the first year decided, okay, we're going to shut it down. We're just going to open source and let other people build. And that was like this, it was like an arrow to my heart, right? Because it was like, this is what I want to build. And I remember Jed approached me and was like, you're going to go build it, aren't you? And I was like, I am. Yeah. And I was like, okay, I'll see you later. And it was an emotional day. I remember I cried and I was like, oh man, this is, I don't want to leave this team, but right. I have to do this. I have to go build this thing. I know it because I started it with Quitcoin, and then I got an even further taste where it was great because I wasn't the CEO and I got to learn from another CEO in crypto and a legend in the space. And I really, really appreciate that because I learned so much during that time in this like little micro crash course of 120 days. But when I stepped out of that, I went back to a friend of mine who I had met in the Dogecoin space, Atif Nazir, and I ended up briefly working for a company called Block.io. And Atif was building the kind of like the primary block explorer. It was called Chain.so. It's still around, and Block.io. And I joined this team because I wanted to build infrastructure. I wanted to learn more about crypto security. His background was cryptography and computer science. And so I joined that team and I started working on building custody APIs. And so the ability to build your own wallet. Funny story, that product ultimately was, in the beginning, early days, was more of a wallet than it was a dev tool, because there just weren't so many devs. So when we started to pull our users, we realized, oh, wow, more people are using this as a wallet than a developer tool, right? Because there weren't really many good Dogecoin wallets. And Atif asked me, hey, I'm thinking about acquiring this company Dogechain.info, a play on blockchain.info. Blockchain.info is the original Bitcoin web wallet. Dogechain.info was the original Dogecoin web wallet, and that was built by Glenn Marion. And so Atif acquires this company, and I meet this guy Glenn, and I had known him like through the Dogecoin community, but we didn't really know each other until we started working together. And then we spent several months offboarding those users from Dogechain.info into block.io. And that's where Glenn and I spent every day together talking, sending each other. We would communicate in like GIFs and memes. I was like, man, this guy's really cool. I really like this guy. And he showed me some, stuff that he was working on. He had an idea, I've got this passion project to make kind of like a BitPay for Dogecoin or something like that, or like a BitPay competitor. And a few months after working there, I just approached Glenn and said, what do you think? I have this idea, it was originally called QuickCoin, and it went to Stellar, and then I came here and I met you. And, if there were ever a hacker and hustler team together, I think, we could come together. I could be the hustler, you could be the hacker. What do you say? And he said, yeah. And so we left block.io.
Again, back from a little technical difficulty. There were two other questions I had to kind of close up this interview we had. With the recent like distrust in the financial and like banking system, like I think there's this natural narrative in crypto that crypto is anti-banking. So like, how do you start to mend the trust and prove to people that crypto and banking is actually the future?
Yeah. When I first discovered Bitcoin in 2009, it took me about 2 weeks to really understand it, because my mind immediately went to, all right, well, there's some sort of way that this plugs in with, it took maybe not 2 weeks, but like for the first week or so, I just didn't really get it. I was like, so how do we transact with it? And, so I'm going to send you this unit, but then how does that turn into cash? And that's where the aha moment occurred after I started to research it. And it's funny because it's almost like an alchemical process in your own mind where you started like, wait, what is money anyways? Right? Like we just assumed for so long, like this is just, you just take it for granted, but you don't really think too much about where money comes from or where it goes to. And so the early ethos of Bitcoin had actually sprung out of, decades of research, of cryptographic research. And in the 90s, they had already attempted, when I say they, a lot of the same people who were involved in the origins of Bitcoin had already attempted this, right? So Adam Back is one of those people, Hal Finney, all these people were when I was a teenager, they were in those news groups and those hacker news groups. Mm-hmm. So when I discovered Bitcoin, I recognized a lot of names like, oh, these people have been working on this stuff for a long time. DigiCash was one of the early attempts at that. There were multiple attempts at digital currency early on. Something called Flues. Oprah Winfrey endorsed it.
I remember that. Yep.
There were a bunch of attempts, but nothing really took off because they couldn't solve the decentralization problem, the trilemma, right? Security, scalability, speed. They couldn't solve we couldn't solve the trilemma of crypto. Also, the other issues were we had issues with the Byzantine general consensus problem, right? The fault tolerance. How do you know that your crypto has not? How do you know that somebody can't like essentially counterfeit it, right? How do we know that somebody can't double spend your cryptocurrency? And the blockchain really solved those problems. So in the early days, there was certainly what we called like the cypherpunk movement that was anti-banking. It was, in the first Bitcoin Genesis block, there is a hash in there from Satoshi. Banks on the brink of bailout for the second time, says Chancellor of the UK. And, this was around 2008 with the financial crisis, global financial crisis that sprung up through mortgages and unscrupulous lending practices, and which collapsed a lot of banks in the industry. Ultimately, Bitcoin kind of sprung out of this as an answer to, an anti-banking movement, I would say, in some ways. But ultimately, isn't it just an evolution of that? Because at the end of the day, let's say let's say all of your financial dreams come true, and you have $100 million or $1 billion or something. You never have to worry about money ever again. But let's say it's all in Bitcoin or even stablecoins, right? Are you going to keep it in a ledger under your mattress? Your house burns down, somebody steals it, somebody, the good old fashioned wrench method. Somebody just tapes you to a chair and beats you with a wrench until you give them your seed phrase, right? Banks exist for security, for services. There are a lot of reasons why you would want to have an entity to help you manage, secure, and control your cash and your assets, especially if you had a lot. Especially if you wanted to build a trust for your kids or future generations, things like that. So there are a lot of services around Bitcoin or around potential to build around blockchain. Originally, the thought was you're going to be your own bank, but even given the technology at scale, unless even if you only have $20 to your name, okay, at that point, well, it's not so big of a deal, right? But being your own bank can be pretty scary, especially if you had significant assets. And so ultimately, the way that I see it and always have is that this technology, I love to use the streaming analogy. I love to use the postal parcel system analogy, because these are things that evolved, right? Like if I'm going to send you a message, I don't write it down on paper and put a stamp on it and send it to you in the mail. I just send you a DM over Slack, right? Or Twitter or something, a Signal. Same thing with crypto and with payments. That's kind of the evolution there. And so ultimately, banking and Bitcoin technology and blockchain technology do go hand in hand. It's just that they're going to evolve. So 20 years ago, again, use the analogy of streaming. I used to go to Blockbuster video rental when I was a kid in the 90s. That was a nostalgic thing. And then, then there was Netflix, then there was Hulu. People don't go. There is no video store anymore. If there is, it's purely like it's a museum or some sort of niche thing that people want tapes or something, right? But it's not a big business, not anymore. It's not part of the mainstream. And so when you think about banks, what's going to happen to banks? They're going to go completely digital. You're not going to need to physically go in really anymore. Maybe there's a few branches here or there representative, but this whole idea that like you used to go and wait in line at the bank, that's gone. That's dead. And it died with COVID, right? Because after COVID, you actually had to schedule an appointment. It was like going to the bank and waiting in line is bad enough, but scheduling an appointment to maybe make it to the line, forget it. If there's some way I can avoid doing that, COVID gave everyone the incentive to not do that, to do everything but that, to avoid that at all costs. Because also, why would you want to go into a room where people could cough on you or something, right? To touch dirty money. So that, and now the COVID thing is over, but the mentality has not changed. I literally won't even carry cash with me for the most part anymore, ever again, because I just don't think that that's a thing anymore. And in the future, it'll live in your phone. Dollars, even paper greenbacks, will even live in your phone. Those are stable coins. Those are CBDC. And so, banks are going to evolve in the same way Blockbuster Video evolved. We don't go to a store anymore in the way that I think in the future, 98% of your bank interactions, 99% of your bank interactions will be over video on your phone. So you won't have to go to a branch. There are no paper checks anymore. The only time that I think you're going to have to go to a branch in the future is for corporate banking stuff, maybe potentially. And even that, as the future evolves, look at like the metaverse, right? It was a flop in V1 with Meta and Facebook, but I don't think that's the end of it. I think we absolutely are going to go into Ready Player One. It just takes some time for the technology to evolve and to get better. I think that Mark got a little ahead of himself, but he's a visionary in his own right. It takes a lot of guts to do something like that. I think that it will happen. It will happen for banking. Banking is the future of banking. Is you will go into a virtual bank in a metaverse, and that will be your physical interaction for some space that you and people will laugh at me and say, "Oh, that's dumb. That'll never happen." Let's see what happens, because I guarantee it will happen. And physical branches are just going to go away. That's really going to be the thing. Paper cash is going to go away. And I think over the next 10 years, to see an event in our lifetime where world governments are saying, you know what, deposit paper cash and pay your taxes with CBDC, and we'll give you some benefits.
Yep.
We'll give you something to get rid of, because it actually requires a lot of energy and money to do this whole paper cash thing, right? On top of the risk that businesses take with counterfeit, right, and damaged bills and things like that. The whole creation and destruction of physical currency, we're going to watch that end over the next 10 years. That is guaranteed going to happen. And maybe it doesn't go away, because it might be dystopian to say we can't have this anymore. But certainly you're going to get tax benefits. You're going to get all the incentives the government can give to you to go digital. I mean, everyone watching this stream, how many people watching the stream have gone paperless with their bank? Probably everyone. Why do you let your bank kill the environment, sending you a stack of paper that you literally just throw in the trash, right? So same thing with paper money. It is cotton and paper after all at the end of the day. And it's a tremendous budget of the Secret Service as well. And the Secret Service is the one that monitors counterfeit and currency. When you take that away, you can reallocate resources. And I think more than ever, at least in the United States, we need to be allocating our resources to the right things. So that's just one thing of many things that I think our government could do to start to focus the money and the energy on the right things. If we cut down a lot of areas of government and focused on the things where Americans really need that value, that could be good. And so you can say, well, stablecoin today, it doesn't work for the disadvantaged, or it doesn't serve the unbanked or underbanked, because it costs $1 to send an Ethereum transaction or whatever. But there are early technologies like Proton, like metal blockchain. They're early technology. Even the new Ethereum account abstraction that allows, this is where the world is moving in blockchain. And I saw Brian Armstrong recently tweet, our goal would be to get Coinbase Wallet to make stablecoin payments for under a penny in under a second. And I was like, hey, over here, we already did that at Metallicus. But it just takes a while for people to notice,
And that was actually, it was a good segue into kind of like my final question is like, you have this great concept. You've had a past history of being able to predict trends, and you have this great concept of where it's going. And so if we were to pick some arbitrary number, say like, I don't know, 20, 50 years down the line, and we can make the statement like Metallicus is successful, what does that look like? Like, where does Metallicus stand in that vision that you have, that you're confident that we're going?
Yeah, so Metallicus's vision is to become the world's most customer-centric global digital asset banking network. And that's kind of a mouthful, but the idea is to become a digital asset banking network that's connected to every bank in the world, and to kind of replace some of the older systems that are slow or antiquated, to reduce fraud and friction and payments. And so for us, what would be the big sign of success? It would be a metal connection and integration, metal ecosystem integration into every bank and payment processor. Why should every merchant spend 2 to 3% plus 30 cents for all retail transactions pretty much everywhere globally? 3% all the way down. What's left at the bottom of the supply chain? 3% for one merchant, but 3% times 3% times 3%. That's the pay per text message model. That it was brilliant for the early day payments, and crypto, was supposed to go around that. But what happened was Bitcoin became a store of value, and the early layer ones and early blockchains were just not suited to rival Visa. But now blockchains are. Now you have Proton, you have layer 2s on Ethereum, you have all of these technologies that are starting to get there. I would say we're probably about 5 to 10 years away from the end of paper cash, from the end of blockchains that are painful to use. I think all this stuff's going to get abstracted away, and success for Metallicus would be to be a part of that. When people talk about easy to use digital payments, I'll metal you. I'll use the MetalPay app. Oh yeah, I see the metal logo inside of my bank, just like I see like Zelle or something like that. So for us, that would really be, the big win. And also simultaneously want to, at Metallicus, we're building this bank software. Myself and some other executives, Arena Burke and our CFO, are also forming a bank, First Block Bank and Trust, a proposed bank charter under FPBT Holdings. And so we also want to build our own bank, not just the banking technology, but we also want to build a bank and become a global bank, sort of like Citibank, where you have Citi in Los Angeles and New York, and you also have it in Hong Kong. I think that blockchain technology can empower that, and so for us, that's really the hallmark of success. The metal logo inside your bank, the word metal becoming synonymous with free digital payments, and metal kind of becoming that platform that you use to manage your crypto banking activity. I feel like we've made a really good inroad with that. What's happening right now is the commercialization of blockchain. And, when it was originally was Bitcoin, and then blockchain became the buzzword, and then digital assets, they kept kind of moving away from this anti-banking rhetoric. But in the future, every bank will have its own blockchain. Every government will have its own CBDC. Digital assets will become ubiquitous. And I think that it is going to make life a lot better, because in the past, everything was walled garden. It was harder to access higher rates of interest and things like that. It was harder to connect different types of assets. And also the markets were kind of hamstrung, right? In this future world, we're going to have 24/7 global markets. Right now, market shuts off at like 6 p.m. And that's just not the world. That's not the world of the future. That's the world when people used to write down on a piece of paper how much, and people are trading stocks with pieces of paper. That's that world, because those guys have to go home at the end of the day and they power all of that. But in the future, everything's digital. And in my mind, the reason why you couldn't have 24-hour markets right now, the way things are built, is because we're still living in that, we still have that financial vestigial artifact, right? How could all of these global securities markets in different countries trust each other on the amount of outstanding shares and things like that? So we're talking about crypto securities now. Into the future, blockchain will allow that trust between global securities markets, between banks, between businesses. What used to take weeks or months to get sign off on contracts and things like that will all be digital in the future. And you have governments too, even that recognize this. Like you look at the Estonian government, and they have the e-residency program where you can notarize documents with a FIDO device in your computer. And that's using cryptography. It's not using a blockchain, but give it some time and it will. And it will be using the digital identity connected to your CBDC, connected to your capability to sign. The concept of notary and all of those things will start to become digital. So for metal to be successful, it would really be the how the word Band-Aid invented by 3M is synonymous with if you cut yourself, you put on the Band-Aid, but that's actually a product, right? That's how I see metal, right? I'll metal you. Oh, I have metal. Oh, do you have metal in your bank? Oh, yes, I do. Right? You don't even think about it. And at some point, other products are built around that, and maybe even we become so synonymous that that's just like a verb or something. That would be the goal, to become a verb. So success happens when metal is the verb for digital payments.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And with your vision, and your leadership, I have no doubt that will be the future. And especially considering your track record with being able to predict where things are going. So,
thank you.
I wanted to just truly thank you for your time and for taking us, through some childhood memories. And I look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thanks for having me on, Andrew. And thanks for everyone tuning in. See you next time.
Thank you.